I'm Liz Whiteacre, and let's talk about reflecting on your life through writing. This week, we're focusing on the elements of creative nonfiction, particularly personal essays, and we'll also be exploring tips for writing engaging, longer essays. All of the things that we've already learned about writing prose apply, and we're exploring how we can extend our own narratives. Just a reminder before we get started that what makes creative nonfiction nonfiction is that we are focusing on our own lives in this unit. When we were looking at writing short stories, we might have used our lives to inform what we wanted to write about. We might have written about a person that was very similar to us or loosely based our story on something that we have a lot of experience with or something that happened to us. But in a short story, we're able to change details, modify how things might have happened, invent conversations and dialogue for people, kind of create a conglomeration where maybe one character is really representing two or three different people that we might have known in real life. When you sit down to write your creative nonfiction or your personal essay for this lesson, it's important that you're starting with yourself. What makes it nonfiction is that it really happened to you, and you are doing your best to honor that sharing of experience. You may not remember every single detail, and that's okay, but you can't say that there was an elephant there in homeroom if an elephant didn't really appear in that homeroom, unless it was metaphorical, but that's a figurative language techniques we'll explore later on. The elements of creative nonfiction look a lot like the elements of the short story that we just focused on last week. We are going to have a narrator that is likely ourselves. Every once in a while, you may be creating nonfiction that tells the story of maybe a family member, maybe something a little bit more biographical. So there are instances where you might be writing in third person and sharing someone else's story that really happened. But for this particular assignment, I'm asking you to be the narrator of your own personal story. So this would be written in first person, and probably the point of view will either be objective or limited omniscient. Do you want to share how you're feeling about things, right? Objective doesn't work as well because we don't expect a personal essay to look like and feel like a movie, right? We want to be able to understand how their narrator, the person writing it, experienced things and what those things meant to that person. And omniscient generally doesn't quite work because in real life, we don't have access to what's in other people's heads and what they're thinking and feeling unless they tell us. So we might be able to indicate that in our essay by having other characters that we're engaging with speak out loud or write something down for us, or their body language that we used as cues to understand how they were feeling. So first person limited omniscient is the way to go. In terms of characters, those would be the people that are populating your story. If you're focusing on a time in your life where really it's just you doing something and reflecting on that experience, there may not be anybody in your essay. If you're talking about, for example, something that happened to you at school, well, then those characters in the essay or those people would be determined by, well, who was a part of your life at that time? Was it your teacher? Was it your parents? Maybe a classmate or a friend that was particularly important. You may also find yourself having flat or stop characters, maybe just kind of generally referring to the office staff at the school or referring to the students on the playground where you're not giving a lot of detail, but we can kind of imagine who those people are in the background. Thinking about your narrative structure will be helpful. This is a personal essay, so you're not necessarily having to think about it in terms of a plot for a short story. You might be combining what you think of as plot for a short story with what you think of as a personal essay that you might have written in composition. So you can certainly do a linear or timeline approach where you say, this happened to me, then this, then this, then this, and you're explaining to us the significance of that as you go. Or you're able to say, hey, I think this because of these different experiences I have. And you might be, popping back and forth in time as you do that to different moments in your life that all add up to this epiphany that you've had about something. Setting will probably be a part of your personal essay, depending on how you've chosen to write it. If you're kind of in your mind the whole time, we might not get a big sense of environment, but certainly if something significant happened at school on the playground, a description of that playground will become important, just like a description of the environment is important in a story. Your voice, how you're writing your personal narrative, is just as important as the voice you're developing in a short story. When you're thinking about voice, you are thinking about yourself as the narrator, right? So this should absolutely sound like you. If you use certain words all the time, include them. You don't have to hit a thesaurus and look up something that might sound more academic. This is your story and your essay. And then something that is really important in the creative nonfiction personal essay is an element of reflection. And we're going to take a look at that in just a moment with some examples that I've created. We're not just saying, hey, this happened in a personal essay. The reader's expectation is that we're going to say, hey, this happened and, right? This is why it's meaningful to me. This is the lesson I learned from it. This is what you can learn from my experience, my mistakes, or my triumphs. So there is some sort of engagement between the narrator and the events that helps us understand by the end of the essay why this is an important thing that we need to listen to, we need to understand, we need in order to be able to go on and live our lives. When you're thinking about writing a longer, engaging personal essay, you might consider the timeline, right? When you were writing your micro essay, we were really zeroing in with a microscope on kind of one moment that was significant to you. When you're writing 1,000 to 2,000 word personal essay, you have literally more space. So you might think about that kind of timeline from start to finish. If you want to talk about something significant that happened during your education, do you need to give us some context by maybe starting in kindergarten and how that laid the groundwork for something that happened junior year and kind of pop in to those few significant moments along the way? Or are you going to be zeroing in on maybe 1 week in your life or maybe 1 hour and talk about why that's significant? So thinking about significant moments in your life, if it's something that you feel changed you, if it's something that altered the direction that you were heading in, or something that really changed a relationship, probably those are great topics to look at for a longer essay, because you're going to have an opportunity to explain to people why it's important. You may need to do a little bit of research as you're thinking about the topic and the idea that you want to explore in a longer personal essay. I know when I sit down to write about my life, it can be helpful to look through photographs, right? Talk to family members. Hey, do you remember this happening? Or talk to friends. Sometimes I'll even do some Google searching and I might go back to, oh, I want to write about high school. What was high school like? Yeah, I might look up what was happening at the time in old newspapers, or I might go back to my old yearbook and flip through and be like, oh yes, that's what my haircut looked like. So you can certainly kind of prime the pump, if you will, or get yourself thinking about that time. Look at your social media account. If you're trying to write about senior year in high school and you have that sort of record of what were the things you were posting and who were you hanging out with and what were you into, go back and look at that account and scroll to that time period of life. So all of those things can help you remember important moments, but it can also help you with remembering detail and conversations that can really bring your essay to life. And then finally, the structure. How it makes sense to you may not be the way that it makes the most sense to other people. So taking a little bit of time to plan out. If you are thinking about telling your story to someone else, right, you might kind of jot down what is it they need to know to understand that particular thing. And then you might take a moment to consider, well, what kind of information from before would they need to know? And maybe what kind of information do they need to know about me now to understand why I feel the way I do? So doing some pre-writing, maybe a little outline, drawing, right, on a piece of paper. You could do a bubble map, concept map, looking through and kind of thinking about what are the most important things people will need to know to understand your story and its significance. And then what order should that information come in? Do I need to start telling you about, I don't know, sophomore year in high school? And in order for you to understand why I found myself after school in this hallway, right, you need to know, oh, I was doing this activity, right? So you can kind of start to place events in time and then think about, well, I need to zip back and share this before I can share this. And having that kind of orientation, having that map before you sit down to write can be really helpful. So we're going to take a moment. I'm asking a prompt question. What's a task you do regularly that's been changed by quarantine? And if you have handy, a pencil, piece of paper, jot that down real quick. Or if you don't, close your eyes for a moment and think through something that you do regularly that's different now that you're in quarantine. I'll wait. Take your time. You got it? All right. Before I started recording, I answered this in a free write myself. So in my free write, I remembered when I had to go to campus this term in order to pick up some stuff from the mailroom and do a few chores. So I wrote about what that experience was like. Here's what I wrote. You can read along with me. Even though it was peak time on campus, I made it to my parking lot in record time and got a spot right by Goodhall's door. That morning, I didn't pass anyone on the stairwell. The classrooms were dark and quiet. No one sat at the tables on the third floor laughing over homework and coffee. It smelled like bleach in the hallway outside my office. No one to say, hey, how have you been to in the copy room. No plants to greet me when I flipped on the light. I brushed the dust off my desk before I opened my laptop to log in to the Zoom call. I took a deep breath after I pulled off my mask and tucked it next to my notepad, just in case I actually got to see a coworker today. So in this response, I really focused on what was I physically doing. And because I knew that this is something that I was going to share with other people, I tried to use those figurative language techniques to describe so that you could get a picture in your mind of what things looked like, smelled like, felt like as I went through these different motions to get from my car up to my desk. When I do that sort of free write to get started with a personal essay, and I'm really focusing on just what happened, it can be helpful as my next step to identify the significant moments in what I've written. So here, what I've done with my highlighter in Word was go through and highlight the sentences and create kind of chunks of significant moments. So I was thinking that very first sentence, right, arriving to campus, right, and getting that great parking spot, like that's kind of one moment. The next moment for me was not seeing anyone and having the classrooms be dark and quiet. The next significant moment to me was the absence of anyone kind of outside my office on the floor, nobody in the copy room. Usually those are really busy areas when I'm visiting campus. And then the next one to me was not having any plants. I know y'all haven't been able to come to my office and see, but I usually have quite a few plants in there that keep me company and clean the air, make it a very joyful place to be. They're all gone. They're at home with me right now. So it looks very empty whenever I go there. And I can go a month two before I am returned to my office. And so it definitely gets dusty. And so that was one. And then the last one I thought was removing a mask and thinking about the fact that, well, I better have it at the ready just in case I actually do get to see someone. That's something that's very different about my experience on campus. So if you do your free write to get started with your longer essay, I recommend you stop for a moment after you've written down, this is what happened to me, and go through yourself with as many different colors as you want and break it into different moments in time that you feel are significant. What you can then do is a developing reflection exercise. So I kept that very first statement in my free write. Even though it was a peak time on campus, I made it to my parking lot in record time and got to a spot right by Goodhall's door. I'm going to stop here and think about, well, what's significant about that? Why am I telling you? What is different about that? If I'm thinking about that original prompt question, what's different about my routine because of the quarantine? I know that this is different in my head, right? And those of you who have to commute know that it can be really hard to park on campus at 10 a.m. in a spot nearby where you need to be. But most readers would think, oh, okay. So I want to take a moment and explain there why that is important. So here's what I did in my follow-up free write. This almost never happened. Parking at 10 a.m. in the lot, this was one of the few perks of the quarantine, but I gladly have given it up to see rows of cars, people hustling to classes, students lounging on the grass having picnic lunches. With its people, without its people, campus felt lonely and less productive. No, I felt lonely and less productive, right? So I'm thinking about, wow, I got a sweet parking spot, but what have I given up for that? Why, more really, how do I feel about that? Why am I telling you? And so if you start to do that for each one of your moments, you can begin to develop that sense of reflection in your essay. So I'll read one more here for you. I'm looking at that second chunk. That morning, I didn't pass anyone on the stairwell. The classrooms were dark and quiet. It didn't feel like a place of learning, even though I knew that hundreds of people were logged on to the LMS, participating in classes online. There were even some on campus right now, socially distanced and focused on activities like inserting needles or mixing chemicals or performing sonatas. I missed the classroom, even on days when everyone was stressed out and stomachs grumbled for lunch. Before quarantine, I didn't realize seeing students' faces responding to a citation formula or a poem in class, rather than just their text on my laptop screen, was so important to me, how connected it made me feel to the learning process. So if you're thinking about just the blue highlight, right, as a reader, all of that stuff that's not highlighted was in my head when I wrote the blue stuff, but you wouldn't know it. So one thing that's important as you are developing your personal essay is making sure you stop yourself to explain to readers what's going on in your head. They only get what's on the paper. Even if you need to say, because why, because why, because why, right? And your first draft has a ton of becauses in it, that's just fine. You can think about your voice, you can think about presentation of ideas later on when you're in the revision process. But as you're trying to get your ideas down on the page, why? Making sure that you're writing those great ideas down so that readers understand why things are significant and important, that is so helpful for that next phase. Now I went through and I did that for each one of my highlighted points. And you are welcome to go into the resources tab and check out the PowerPoint and look at those if you'd like to read the development of all of those on your time after the presentation here. This is the very last one I'll end with. So my last sentence in my first free write was, I took a deep breath after I pulled off my mask and tucked it next to my notepad, just in case I actually got to see a coworker today. It was hard adapting to a new routine at work and in my personal life, but I valued everyone's safety and health above a feeling that I might be missing something from an in-person connection. It's important to me that I don't disengage and give up. Social distancing doesn't mean distancing, and taking steps to manage my time so that I can seek opportunities to connect with colleagues and students, whether on campus or from home, is worth it. Right? And so again, I'm thinking about that moment of being about to see people in Zoom and really wishing that I might get to see them in the office. So my free write was 141 words. And just going through that developing reflection, breaking it into significant chunks and explaining why they were meaningful to me and why I was telling you about that took me all the way to 643 words. That's pretty significant. And this is just the free writing brainstorming part of my project. I would take these chunks, right, and then think about revising this to hit my 1,000 to 2,000 word essay by looking at what my touchstone is. I like to use that word in a personal narrative. We could also use the word thesis statement or main message or moral or theme. I want to make sure that as I'm telling you this about my life, that I have an end goal, that I have that lesson I want you to walk away with. So you feel that the time reading my personal experiences are meaningful to you, just like they're meaningful to me as the writer. So I would want to think about, okay, I've got all of these things I'm talking about, going to work during the quarantine while I'm teaching online. In the end, what am I really trying to say in this piece? And I'd want to summarize that in a sentence and then start to go through and look at my paragraphs, my chunks, and see if I have any holes in my narrative. Does moving through that moment of arriving to the parking lot and getting to my office, does that really help people understand that thesis or touchstone, right? And if not, what am I missing? And so I might go through and identify, oh, I should mention this and explain why this is significant. I can start to also, as I arrange this paragraph, think about developing connections and transitions. I might find as I start to explain why things are important, that I'm kind of talking about some different issues, right? And that's just fine. But I might have to move from this idea to this idea and kind of write something in between so that you can follow that particular path. I might also identify places where I could integrate scenes or evidence. I could go out and do a little bit of research on the internet or professional journals that talk about how do people respond to these types of situations or Zoom, or what are challenges that educators are facing. And just like I might in a composition essay I've written in the past, I can pull in some quotes from those people and present that as evidence too to my readers of the impact that this is having on me and perhaps other people as well. I can go into scene and maybe I might like to describe a little bit more. I kind of mentioned hanging out in the common area on the third floor. I could maybe kind of do a flashback to my last experience there. That was really wonderful. That would help you understand why I'm missing it so much now. You can also think about the significance of the whole. So I have my touchstone, I have my introduction, I've got these different discussion paragraphs. At the end of my essay, it is worthwhile to not just say, and I told you this happened and it happened, right? But maybe think about what's the end result for me as the narrator? what do I learn from this moving forward, or how am I using this experience to do something different or something the same or better in the future. So you can kind of think about, what's the point of sharing this experience and what I've learned? What am I doing with that information as the writer, so that the reader understands what I've learned from my own reflection. I'll also think about voice. As I was doing my free writes and reading, I had that one typo there, I know you noticed. And I also had some shifting back and forth between tenses. I would also want to think about how casual or formal would I like to be. And so those are things I would revise for. And I'll also want to think about creating a title. Now, my title can be really interesting here. I could announce my topic. I could share my end result. What have I learned? I could title it after the place, right? Zooming in Good Hall. Okay, what's this going to be about? And share what I learned from that experience. But I will want to test out a title in that draft before I share it with folks in workshop. I hope walking through the process that I take as I'm beginning to develop a longer personal essay was helpful to you. And if you have any questions while you're writing your own piece this week, don't hesitate to reach out. Some people's micro essays left so many questions. I know when I was responding to some people, I was like, what happened next? And you might have heard that in workshop too. So you can certainly go back to some of the things that you have been free writing and some of the shorter pieces that you've developed so far into the term, and use those as kind of a jumping off point to develop something that's longer if you would like. And you can certainly come up with a brand new topic for your essay this week. Next week, you will be sharing both your short story and your personal essay in our prose workshops and starting to get some feedback on those pieces. I hope that you get in touch if you have any questions, and I cannot wait to see what you create.